Got it. I think we're on Facebook. Okay. We're good to go. Let's see if anybody else. Oh. All right. Nobody else. Maybe a few people will show up. Okay. So first off, how are you guys? Okay. Doing well?
Good.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So type in the chat. What was the question? What do you hope to get out of today's session? So if you can type in the chat what you hope to get out of today's session, then that way I can sort of try to answer those questions. Or you can unmute yourself, whichever comes first. But some people are afraid to unmute themselves, and some people are afraid to turn the camera on. Right, Frida? I'm not mentioning any names at all. And as soon as I say that, Shazeen decides to shut off her camera. Okay, so just type in why you wanted to, why you attended and what you hope to get out of today's session. And the reason I do this is because I try not to just keep it, I try not to keep it just one way. So I'd like it if it was a two-way conversation. So if you can think about that, then that would be good. I'll just wait till everybody kind of responds. Unless I'm not getting this. Okay. Fazila says test anxiety, why it happens, strategies to reduce this, the level of test anxiety. What level of test anxiety is helpful? Yeah, good question. Okay. How about the rest of you guys? What happened? Did they disappear? Oh, Shazin. Avoiding past mistakes that may have caused anxiety. How to beat anxiety. Okay, good. Okay. So last week we talked about anxiety a little bit. So today I'm going to go into more detail in terms of what is test anxiety and how we can sort of fix it. So I always like to do a bit of an intro. So my intro is it's important because this topic I think is important because there's a lot of smart people who are intelligent and they know the material, but all of a sudden when it comes to a test, they just shut down. And so they make simple mistakes. And I know this because I used to do the same thing. I think every problem that we discuss, I've had, like stress, poor mindset, bad time management. Like I think I've had it all. So I remember writing exams and I would be so nervous and I'd be so scared that I couldn't even like understand what the question was. And then all of a sudden I go back to the same question when we're like looking at it, or like a week later after I've written it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what, like that's what they meant, but I never even thought of it. So it was kind of a weird situation for me. So a lot of smart people are intelligent, they know what they're doing when there's nothing on the line. So you can have a discussion with them, you know that they understand it, you know that they grasp the material, all of a sudden it comes to a test and they shut down. And the problem is that we're not graded on how much information we know. And this is very important. We're not graded on how much information we know. We're graded on how well we can communicate the information that we know. So it's a huge difference because most people say, I've accumulated all this information in my mind and I know things. And we're like, okay, great. Now tell me about it. And then they can't. So the assumption is if they can't explain it, then they don't know it. And that is where most students get into trouble, because what happens is not only are they not able to explain it, they have difficulty handling the stress and the anxiety that comes along with the exam. So what can happen is that this can be very painful and very, very demoralizing for students. And a lot of really intelligent students, they just shut down and they just don't do well because they're just not able to handle the pressure that comes. Now, what's interesting, and I also like to talk about people in the professional world, same thing happens. So let's say you guys have to do a presentation. And in fact, we're doing presentations in class right now. And you'll speak to a student and everything is going fine and they're happy and no problems. All of a sudden they have to speak in front of a class and then they have difficulty, or they pause, or they don't know what to say next. And it's because they can't handle that high levels of anxiety or stress. So there's, I think, 3 reasons that I'm going to address in terms of why this happens. So number one, the reason why a lot of people have test anxiety is because their preparation process is not effective. So what happens is they prepare in a way which isn't conducive to doing well on exams. So here's a really good example. Imagine if you were going to learn how to ride a bike or a bicycle. So you're going to learn how to ride a bicycle. And if somebody gave you a training manual on how to ride the bicycle, so you read that training manual cover to cover, you read it 10 times, you memorized everything on the training manual. Does that mean you can ride the bicycle? Can't do it, right? And the reason being is because knowing the information and understanding the theory behind something doesn't mean you can actually act on it when it happens. And same thing in sports. I've coached so many sports teams, and I've had I've had teams where they are, they don't practice, they don't show up to, they don't show up to practice, they don't do what they're supposed to do, and then all of a sudden the tournament starts, and they come to me and they're like, okay, so what do we do to beat them? And I'm like, well, you don't even know the basics. So how do you even expect to beat the other team? That you never even showed up for practice. It's the same thing. A lot of students do that. They just put as much theory in their head, and then they go ahead and they're like, okay, let me write the exam. But they haven't prepared properly, right? So they haven't actually prepared in the way that they should prepare. So just like understanding the concepts and understanding the theory, it doesn't mean you're prepared for the exam, because you actually have to communicate under pressure. So what's important to understand is that your preparation needs to change. And I'm going to give you some tips on how you can prepare better. Another one is that a lot of students we have this thing called our imagination. And that's actually one of the most powerful things that we have, but we're not taught how to use it. So what happens is most people, because they don't know how to use their imagination, they just imagine worst case scenarios. So a lot of students, before they go into a test, they are imagining things such as, what's going to happen if I make a mistake? What's going to happen if I don't get a certain grade? What's going to happen if I don't know how to answer the question? What happens if I fail? So right away, when they're talking to themselves like that, they're not going to do well, because they're already putting pressure on themselves. The key is our imagination can be used any way we want. So what I started doing when I started to do better in school is I started asking myself things like, what would a genius do? Like, how would a genius answer this question? If I was really, really intelligent, what would I do at this point? And I would just keep asking myself these really empowering type of questions. And if I failed a midterm, if I didn't do well on a midterm, I'd be like, well, what's the advantage here? How is this going to be good for me in the long run? And I just keep on training myself. And I've done that for a while. And I look at a situation and I'm like, well, instead of going into it thinking I'm going to mess up, I go into it, I start imagining, what's going to happen if I really do well here? What's going to happen if I, do excellent here? And you may not get the answer right away, but if you just start gearing your thoughts in a more positive way, your imagination will sort of help you through it. Another one is that, and this is very common, is most students feel that they don't have enough time. So what happens is they go onto a test, and in their mind, they're thinking, I better hurry because I'm not going to have enough time to answer these questions. So when they feel like they're not going to have enough time to answer these questions, they're fighting the clock. And so when they're fighting the clock, all of a sudden the stress increases, because they'll read a question. And again, this happened to me. They'll read a question and they'll be like, I don't get it. And they're like, oh my God, if I don't get it, then I'm in trouble, because look at how much time is being wasted. So then they're thinking about the time that's being wasted more than trying to understand the question. So then they freak out and they panic and all that stuff. So these are three reasons, and there might be a few more, but these are the main reasons I think students don't do well on exams, and it's because these reasons that I just gave really cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress on their tests. So then the next question is, what do we do? How do we figure out what to do here? So the first thing I would recommend is when you prepare for an exam, prepare differently. So the most common way of people preparing for tests is they internalize a lot of the information that they need to know. So they have to read a chapter, so they'll read the chapter. They have to do some, maybe they have to like understand a diagram, so they understand a diagram. So the problem is that just because you've put that information in your head, it doesn't mean you can communicate it when you need to. So in my classes, I tell my students that the old definition of knowledge is actually the reason why they aren't doing well. So I actually give them a new definition of knowledge. And the new definition of knowledge that I give them is it's the ability to articulate valuable information when required to do so. So the ability to articulate valuable information when required to do so. But the traditional definition of knowledge is very close to something like the amount of data that's in your mind or something like that, or the amount of information that's in your mind. And my point is that what good is it if it's in your mind if you're not able to articulate it? Like, what good is it right now if I am telling you how to, if I know how to reduce test anxiety, but it's in my head, what good is it if I can't explain it to you? There's no point, right? Like, it's in my head, but if I can't convey it to somebody, then how do you know that I even know how to do this? So that's why it's important to understand that knowledge is not what's in your head, it's your ability to communicate the valuable stuff that's in your head. And the reason I say valuable is because a lot of stuff that we've been told is actually not valuable. And as time goes by, you have more and more information given to you which is not valuable. So for example, you go through a textbook and maybe in one chapter you have 30 pages, but if you weren't paying attention to what the valuable parts were, you could actually spend all your time reading 30 pages in a textbook, but only maybe 5 pages were actually valuable. But if you don't know that, then you're going to try to put all that information in your brain, and then you're not going to be able to articulate the stuff that you need to. But if you actually learned how to listen effectively, which is another very important concept, but I won't have time to talk about it today, but then you'll understand exactly where to put your time, where to put your focus, and then not just put the information in your head, but practice articulating it. Another way to get rid of, or not get rid of, but to reduce your test anxiety, because you're always going to have a bit of test anxiety. That's actually a good thing. And I think somebody said here, I don't know what was, I think somebody wrote in the comments here, how much anxiety is good anxiety or something like that. So that's actually a really good question, because you need a bit of anxiety, or you need a bit of stress, otherwise you're not going to be able to focus. So one of the solutions is to understand that your imagination is really the thing that is sort of getting out of control when you're having anxiety. And again, I'm telling you this because I used to have anxiety attacks and panic attacks and things like that. And then I literally had to write out stuff on a piece of paper, and I had to write my thought out on a piece of paper and say, okay, well, what am I thinking? And then I realized, well, obviously, if I'm thinking like that, then I'm going to be in trouble. So I used to think of like crazy things, like if I fail this test, then I'm going to get a 0 on this course. And if I get a 0 on this course, then I'm not going to pass this class. And if I don't pass this class, I'm going to fail. And if I fail, I'm never going to get a good job. And if I never get a good job, I'm going to be homeless. If I'm homeless, then I'm going to die on the streets. Like, it just went crazy, and it all had to do with just one exam. So it can go nuts. Your imagination can go crazy. So the thing is, I realized that I actually have a very good imagination. I'm just not using it correctly. So that's one thing that what I would recommend you do. And another thing is that a lot of students, what they do and what they've been taught is that they base their self-worth on the scores that they get. So for example, if they get 80% or 90%, that in their mind, they're thinking that's what they're worth. So now all of a sudden they don't do well and they fail, then they think, well, if they get 30% or 40%, then they think, well, they're only worth that amount. So they've attached their self-worth to the scores they get on a test. So what you need to do is you need to differentiate that. Okay, you need to understand that that's actually not true. So this whole attachment to getting good grades in terms of making you feel worthy, that's something you got to let go of. Another way to get rid of test anxiety, or to deal with test anxiety, or manage it, I should say, is, and this is something that took me a while to figure out, but it was really powerful. And that is, when you're actually writing the exam, try and prioritize the exam questions. So what I mean by this is, do the questions that you know you can answer first and make them first priority. And the reason for this is because when you do the questions, when you answer the questions that you know you can get right, and you answer them first, the natural result is that your confidence will go up. So if you can answer the questions that you know you can get, and your confidence goes up, all of a sudden now for the other questions, you're now writing those questions with a better mindset. And remember, we talked about this in previous sessions, that our mindset is like the engine of a car. If you have a good mindset, then it'll help you with the other challenges. So in other words, if you can nail those questions right away that you know, your mindset improves, your confidence improves. And when your mindset and your confidence improves, now your mind is working better, and that'll help you get a better chance. I'll give you a better chance to answer the rest of the questions. So that's important. And then the ones that you don't know how to do, you can always come back to them later. And by the way, if you've already read the questions ahead of time, while you're doing one question, your brain subconsciously is answering another question in the background. So this is also kind of what's happening. And this is how our brain is actually one of the most amazing things out there, because while you're actually doing something, it's actually working on stuff in the background. And this is why, I don't know if you've, and most people experience this, and that is, they'll write a test, and as soon as the exam is over, they walk out, and then they remember that they should have written it a different way, or they should have, they remembered the answer, or they figured out the right way to do it. But they can't remember how to do it on the exam because the stress was too high. The reason being was because they didn't give themselves enough chance to read the questions, and they didn't allow the mind enough time. They didn't allow the subconscious to have enough time to actually come up with the answer. Okay, so if you do it in drafts and you read all the questions, your subconscious will actually help you come up with the answer. And if you do the questions first that you know, your confidence goes up. And then lastly is, when you go in to write a test, you want to actually do it with a new mindset. So one of the things that I really had to think of was, how do I go into a test and do it with a new mindset? And then I started looking at, I was watching these game shows, and I started looking at game shows such as Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, or The Price is Right, or I don't know, Jeopardy. And all of a sudden, like, people pay money and they feel so lucky that they can be on these game shows. And it's just so much fun. And like, everybody loves trivia. Like, I even have this James Bond trivia that I do. So everybody loves trivia. Everybody wants to answer a question, and everybody like wants to be the one who gets it right. And all of a sudden, when it comes to a test, then we don't like them. So what's going on here, right? The key here is that you have to look at a test in the same way as if you were doing a trivia game or you were on a game show. And that's exactly what I did. I just said, well, if I was on The Price is Right or on Jeopardy, then I wouldn't be dreading it. I would actually be enjoying it. And that was my attitude. And the game show host was my instructor. So I just did a complete different mindset shift. And then I went into the exam thinking that I'm going to get the highest mark in the class, because to me, it's a fun competition. And then I just shifted the mindset a little bit. And that was pretty huge. And in fact, one of the things I remember doing was even coming to class, because I didn't enjoy coming to class. And I shifted my mindset about coming to class. And my mindset was that, you know, if I was going to go see my favorite performer and I had a chance to go to the front seat, like sit in the front row, would I take it? And the answer is yeah, I would feel very lucky. Or if I was going to go to a sporting event and I got seats very close to the front, would I take those seats that they were given to me? Oh yeah, of course. But then when I'm in the classroom, why do I want to sit at the back all the time? So I did another mindset shift, and I was like, hold on, what if I treated my professor like it was my favorite performer or my favorite athlete or my favorite somebody who I really admired? And then all of a sudden, when I sat in the front, it felt like I kind of was lucky to be there, right? So the thing is that we have our mind, and our mind can look at situations any way that we want. The problem is we're not taught how to use it. And that's why I always say to everyone, whoever takes my course, is that my mindset is at least 85% of being successful. The problem is most people think it's the effort, and that's where they go wrong. Because if you don't have the right mindset, all the effort in the world is not going to help you be successful. This is why, I kind of do this, because a lot of times students are burning out. They're getting overly stressed out. They have anxiety because they're just turning up the effort too much. And the reality is that if you understand how to think better, you can actually do much better with less effort and more enjoyment, and then you get better results and your health gets better too. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. So in the meantime, I'm going to say something here just to wind this down. But what I wanted to do is I just wanted to, and I'm probably going to say this on a regular basis, and that is that, just knowing this information that I just shown you is good, right? So knowing it, you understand it, that's great. But most students, even though I've given them information like this and I've showed them this information, is that they still don't do well, even though they know what they're supposed to do. And the reason being is because they actually don't implement what they know. They just listen to it, they complain about it, they whine about it, and then we're like, okay, now do something different, and then they don't. So this is the reason why a lot of students fail. And so as a result of not implementing, their life does not improve and their results do not improve. And then on top of that, even if they implement it, it's very hard for them to implement on a consistent basis. And also, even if they implement on a consistent basis, sometimes they don't implement correctly, and they don't always do it the correct way. So this is why I always say that it's very important that you have a coach or a mentor, because you have a coach or a mentor. What ends up happening is you have somebody that'll hold you accountable, somebody you can bounce ideas off of, somebody who can help improve your mindset, and somebody you can actually have a discussion with. And by having somebody like that in your life, really what happens is your time and your frustration and your money is actually saved in the long run, and you can increase your performance levels. Okay, so I always like to, I'm probably going to say this on a regular basis, because a lot of times people think that they can do it by themselves. And it's very difficult to do it by yourself, because what ends up happening is you have to just trust yourself to do a good job all the time. And sometimes it's hard because you do need a different perspective and new insight. Okay, so that's kind of my talk for today. So why don't you guys tell me what you've learned from today's session, and then tell me what you're going to implement, okay? And then as you're doing that, I'm just going to summarize. So 4 things that you need to do to improve your test anxiety is prepare differently, right? So prepare differently. And remember that it's not about putting stuff in your head. It's about getting good at executing and doing what you're supposed to be doing under pressure. The other thing that you want to do to improve your test anxiety is don't let your imagination take control. Okay, you need to control your imagination. Okay, otherwise it can take you for a spiral someplace where you don't want to go. Number 3 is when you're doing the test questions, make sure you prioritize and make sure that you are able to build your confidence first by answering the questions that you know first. And in the process of you answering the questions that you know first, while you're answering them, and you've already read the other questions, your subconscious is actually thinking of the answers to the other questions. And then lastly, if you can have more fun on exams, I know it sounds weird. If you can have more fun on exams, you have got a huge advantage. So one way to have more fun on exams is think of yourself as if you're on a game show. Think of yourself as if you're on that show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And you can win $1 million if you can answer these next 10 questions or whatever, okay? And by doing that, what'll happen is that feeling of positivity and those good emotions will affect your mindset in a positive way, and you can now execute in a better way. Okay, and again, all the stuff that I showed you, it's no good if you're not going to implement it and you're not going to be consistent. So this is why sometimes people do well after they get trained in my class, and all of a sudden they go back to their original ways. So you don't want to do that. You want to be consistent, and it's good to have somebody to hold you accountable for these things. Okay, so now let's see. What did you guys learn from today? Okay, so what are the key takeaways? So Fazila, mindset is key. Think of a test like playing a trivia game. Yeah, and Fazila is good at games because we used to play games on Friday nights. Okay, knowing strategies without implementation will help you. Yeah, exactly. Just because you know stuff doesn't mean that you're going to do well. Like a good example was that one about reading a manual on how to ride a bike, right? You can read the manual as much as you want, but if you don't know how to ride a bicycle, if it's all you do, you'll never know what it's like to actually balance on a bicycle. And then implementation, implement at least one of the strategy I've mentioned today. Yeah. Is there one strategy you're going to implement today, Azila? I'll let you think. Farida, don't attach your results to your self-worth. Exactly. Don't do that. Don't attach your self-worth to your results. What are you going to implement, Farida? What's something you're going to implement today? Fazila, have confidence in yourself. That's what. So you're going to implement having confidence in yourself. Okay, that's good. Farida, what are you going to implement? And Shazin, what did you learn? And what are you going to implement? There's no free lunch here. Everybody has to contribute to the discussion. Focus. And at the test time, don't think too much. Yeah, don't think too much. Yeah, like when you say don't think too much, what do you mean? Like you got to think of the answer. Oh, about the results. So don't get too attached to the results. Okay. Okay. Yeah, if that's what works for you. Shazin, biggest takeaway would be being consistent and taking action. Yeah, absolutely. Being consistent and taking action. Something has not worked in the past. Revisit it and why. Yeah, and maybe you can figure out why it didn't work. And in all fairness, being consistent and being disciplined is a way better predictor than hard work, in my opinion. Because you can work hard once in a while, doesn't mean you're going to be consistent. Doesn't mean you're going to get the result. But if you're consistently doing the right thing on a regular basis, success is, in my opinion, it's inevitable. So Farida, read the questions. Yeah, read the questions in detail and read the key terms. Yeah, and ask yourself better questions. Like if you were, because I know you're in law school, but if you were like the best lawyer in the world, how would you answer these questions? If you were the smartest lawyer, or not even the lawyer, if you were the smartest test taker in the world, if you were a genius test taker, how would you answer these questions? That's a good question to ask yourself. And then your brain kicks into another gear. And then Shazin says, and you need help or advice. Yeah, and this is actually really true. If you need help or advice, there is lots of help out there. And one of the things I've noticed that the top students do is that they're very resourceful. Like if they don't get an answer that is going to help them, they don't stop. They'll use their resources to get the answer that they're looking for. And this is something I've just been learning recently, that the people who are stuck and they don't succeed and they're in a rut, they're not resourceful. They don't look for ways to solve their problem. So that's a huge one. But try to reach out at the right people who actually guide you. Yeah, because there's some people out there that, and this is really funny, but there's a lot of people out there who talk a lot, they say a lot, and they're very good at they're very good at shooting off their mouth. Okay. But when push comes to shove, they don't know what the hell they're talking about and they can't help you. So don't think everybody knows what they're doing. Okay. And usually, this is where it gets interesting. Usually, from my experience, the people that talk the least, they usually know the most. And the people that talk the most, usually they don't know that much, but they want everybody to think that they do. Now, this is a generalization, but from my experience, usually the quiet people, the introverts, and I'm just saying that because Shazin knows I'm an introvert. Usually the introverts who are quiet and shy, those are the people that actually know quite a bit. Unfortunately, no one really asks them and no one really approaches them. But those are the ones that if I had to get advice from, I would talk to the introverts. And, my mom's an introvert and she doesn't really say much. She doesn't really, talk too much. But when I ask her questions and I kind of probe her, it's like getting pearls of wisdom. And then there's other people I know who, don't stop talking. It's like, it's a headache because they just, it's more information is not good. The right information is better. Okay, so that's it. Did you guys have any questions for me? Did you want to ask me anything? They talk the most. Yeah, just because they talk the most doesn't mean they know the most. And they will say what's important. Okay, good. So 9:03. Good. So we're done. So thanks again for participating, everyone. And for those of you who are going to watch this later, if you have any questions, please put it into the comment section and we will try to respond. And hopefully by having these sessions, guys, hopefully we all get smarter and more intelligent. And, by the time this pandemic thing is over, you guys will have a whole new mindset on how to be more successful and how to achieve your goals. And that's actually the reason I kind of created this whole thing, because instead of whining and complaining about this pandemic being terrible, we can actually use it to develop our knowledge and develop our insight and get better at things. And for me, it's a privilege that I get to kind of share this information with you. And just by getting your feedback, I'm also learning too. So that's important. Be confident, but don't feel shy, but also know what information is useful. Yeah. And that's, Shazin, that's actually key. And that is, in the future, it's not about how much information you have. It's about knowing what information is valuable and what is useful. That's, in my opinion, the key for the future. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know what information is valuable and they don't know what information is useful. And I'm going to go off a bit of a tangent here, but for example, I took a course, I took a finance course, okay? And a financial advisor was giving the course. And I have nothing against, anyone, but the financial advisor was telling me where to invest my money and what I should do with my money and how I should spend it and all this kind of stuff. And so everybody was like, doing what the financial advisor said. But then I asked the advisor, I said, what's your net worth? How wealthy are you? That's what I wanted to figure out. And the guy was in debt. He didn't have, many investments. And the income that he was making was from teaching these classes. And he really didn't have a good, he didn't have a wealthy, how do I say it? A wealth, the kind of wealth that I guess I was looking for. So then I thought about it. I said, well, would I listen to him? Because he's kind of not really where I want to go. And then I have another friend who's a multimillionaire, and he would give me tips on what to do and where to invest and things like that. So now the financial advisor is giving me so much theory, so much insight, so much knowledge, according to him, but he himself isn't getting the results. Whereas my friend who's a multimillionaire is telling me just to do one thing on a regular basis. And that's what got him to be the millionaire. So you see what I mean? Like, it's sometimes important to just take a little bit of information, but the right information versus a whole bunch of theory and not really knowing what to help you. So I don't know if that's a good example, but I think it's good enough to hit the point. Okay, so but nothing against advisors or anything like that. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that you want to look at the source in terms of where you're getting the information. Okay, so that's that. All right, so if you guys are good, no questions? All good. Okay, so thanks for joining me, and I think we'll see. Well, definitely we'll see you guys next week. All right, take care.
Bye.
Yeah, you're welcome. Take care. Bye-bye. And thanks for your responses.